What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another video. Welcome back to the channel. And I thought we'd try something a little different today. I'm getting a little tired of doing price videos, all right? And I just kind of came to this idea for a video based on a Facebook group. I think it's called like the 12 Back Vintage Group or something along those lines. It's run by collectors that have some of the most incredible collections in vintage Star Wars. Okay, I'm talking about Jeff E. I'm talking about Ross Barr, who is part owner of CAS, Brian Angel, some of these guys that have really big and really awesome collections, much better than anything that I will even have or want to have because I don't have the space for it. But a topic came up on their Facebook page. What are the most overrated items in vintage Star Wars collecting? And the most common answer, based on at least when I was there, was a vinyl cape Jawa. They feel like it's very expensive and overpriced. So I thought it would be kind of fun to put together my top 5 most overrated vintage Star Wars figures. And I'm going to go through the ground rules. I didn't put a ton of time into this, but I at least wanted to give you some general factors that are being considered for my top 5 most overrated. As you're watching this video, please leave a like and sound off in the comments with whether you think I'm crazy, whether you agree with them, what your figures are that are very overrated. And I just wanted to give you my thoughts on this. And, it's not nerd baiting. I'm not trying to nerd bait anybody. I'm not trying to flame or troll anybody. I'm just giving you my personal opinion on what I consider to be the top 5 most overrated. Okay, so here are the factors. All right, here are the factors that I'm considering. And as you can see by this thumbnail here, that's me as a child playing with, I guess, my Mego Incredible Hulk. And I'm wearing a Crest toothpaste pajamas. That's just hilarious to me. And I had a lot more hair back then versus now where I don't particularly have much hair. So that was me as a child holding a Mego Incredible Hulk. I wish I still had that. That's pretty awesome. But here are the factors that I considered. All right, I took a look at aesthetics and how playable it is, things like that. Does it look like the actual character? The aura or reputation, that's kind of a broad category there, but some of these figures that are on my list, they have a big aura. They have a really good reputation. But for some of these other factors, I thought it outweighed the aura or reputation for that particular character or figure, and it's on my overrated list. Collectability is a really big factor to me because if it's got really good collectability, then it probably should not be considered overrated. When I say collectability, I'm talking about, different variants that could be out there, whether it's, different countries of origin or different factories or different paint schemes, things like that. That to me is a big plus when I'm looking at which figures I'm going to buy and add to my collection. I don't have the full run of vintage figures. I don't particularly want the full run of vintage figures. I enjoy collecting different variants and Lily Letty and Spanish PvP and all these kind of cool variants that are out there. So collectability is a big factor. And if it doesn't have good collectability, then in my opinion, it's overrated if some of these other factors are positives for it. So we're going to come back to this slide, each time as we go through my top 5. Price is another big factor. I didn't include like the vinyl cape Jawa in my list because it's not really a particular, it's a variant of a character, right? So it's very expensive, but it's not really what I would consider to be a core character. The core character would be Jawa, and the vinyl cape Jawa is a variant for the Jawa. So I don't consider that to be on the list in terms of overrated because it's a particular variant that is very expensive. So, but if in general the figure is overpriced for what you're getting, that's really where I'm getting at with that. And rarity is another one that I think if it's rare, it probably shouldn't be on the overrated list because it's a rare figure. None of this stuff is really rare. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. But rarity, I think, does play a factor in a number of different ways. Vinyl cape Jawa, I don't know if that's necessarily rare. It's just really expensive. Something like the Pock Toxic Limbs Bosk, again, it's a variant of a character, but it's very rare and it's also very expensive. So, I just I'm just giving you some general guidelines here. I'm not going to stick to it with every one of these, but these are kind of the factors I was looking at when I pulled up the back of a card. I pulled up like a 79 back Lando I've got. And I just wanted to see, okay, so here's a general list, excluding the last 17, which we'll get to. Hint, foreshadowing. So anyway, we're going to come back to this list broadly as we go through them. And we're going to start off with number 5 being maybe not that overrated versus the number 1, which is I consider to be the most overrated figure in Star Wars. So let's go ahead and take a look. So number 5 on my list, even though I like Luke Hoth, I love Luke Hoth, and you can see the Wampa there is kind of hanging in the background, getting ready to want to eat him. But Luke Hoth, I consider to be a kind of an overrated figure. And now, if we were talking about mint on cards, maybe this one wouldn't be on the list. Okay, I'm talking about loose figures or loose graded, whatever. But when it comes to playability, especially with Luke Hoth, I think it really hurts it. It had kind of a weird stance. I remember as a kid having this figure and never getting him able to stand up correctly because of his leg stance was so weird. So aesthetically speaking, I think that it's a pretty decent likeness. It's not great. There's worse likenesses of Luke. Again, foreshadowing, but I think that it's a pretty decent likeness, and I do think the aesthetics of him are nice. Collectability is where Luke really gets hurt, because you really got the Hong Kong, you got the no COO, and then you got the pale face PvP. To my knowledge, those are only the 3 variants that I know of for Luke Hoth. So there's not like a big wide range of figures that you can get for Luke Hoth. So I think that does hurt it. Although the PvP figure is pretty desirable. The pale face PvP with kind of the slightly different colored, darker vest. I think it's a darker vest. So I think that is a very desirable figure, but it's only one variant of 3. Price, he's not really that expensive, so it's hard to ding him too much on that, but it does get a little bit tougher to find a Luke Hoth that hasn't degraded yet. This is the only white figure on my list, because Luke Hoth is white, and he does degrade, especially on the legs, so it is hard to find one super, super clean. And in general, most of them do degrade. That just seems to be the case with Luke Hoth. So I can understand maybe, price being a little more expensive if he was more desirable. But he is very expensive mint on card. And I think that if we were doing overrated mint on card, Luke Hoth would be nowhere near this list, because he's one of those figures that really looks awesome mint on card, but his playability and his aesthetics and things like that are so bad once you take him out of the blister. And he's not particularly rare either. But anyway, that to me is a pretty good starting point for my least overrated top 5. I just think that he's maybe got a little bit better reputation as a figure than he really deserves when you compare him to like Luke Jedi or the Farm Boy Luke or Luke Bespin. Those 3 in particular, in my opinion, are some of the best made characters ever from the vintage line. And Luke Hoth kind of comes up lacking, in my opinion, because of his wonkiness in terms of posability and things like that. Number 4, Leia Endor. That might be somewhat controversial. I don't know. But I feel like she is very, very expensive for what she is. That's just my personal opinion on it. Aesthetically speaking, I think it's actually not a bad figure. I mean, with the helmet and the poncho and the utility belt, things like that, the little pistol. It's got a lot of good accessories, but I don't know if it necessarily captures the beauty of Carrie Fisher in that Endor, some of those Endor scenes, especially the close-ups with her playing with Wicket. So, in my opinion, it's an overpriced figure for what it is. It's a Return of the Jedi figure. It's pretty plentiful out there. Not a ton of variations out there. You got the no COO, and then I think it's really just the Lily Letty, if memory serves. So there's not a lot of different variations that you can collect. But I think for her to be loose, I mean, I see loose examples, ungraded, can be pretty pricey sometimes, mainly due to the pistol, I assume. But in my opinion, I think she's an overpriced figure for what she is. I would much rather spend the money that it takes to find a near mint example of Leia Endor and put it towards a first 12 Princess Leia. And you'll also notice as we go through this list, there's no first 12s on this list. I don't think any first 12 should be on the overrated list. they're the first 12 figures. It's a part of Star Wars history, and I don't consider any of those to be overrated. But I do consider Leia Endor to be somewhat overrated. Another controversial one, although not nearly as controversial probably as number 2 and number 1, I do think that Luke X-Wing is pretty overrated, all right? I don't find this figure to be a very good likeness of Mark Hamill or Luke Skywalker. The hair color, it's not a very playable character. And while there are a lot of variations for this figure, you got the blank raised bar Meccano, you have the raised bar China, you got the Hong Kong, you got the no COO. I think those are the kind of, and the Spanish PvP and the Spanish POC. So you got 5 or 6 different variations, main variations in terms of country of origin and things like that for Luke X-Wing. So he's pretty collectible, and he's pretty collectible in my opinion, especially as a bootleg. You'll notice behind me at one of the second shelves there, I've got, a bunch of different loose graded Luke X-Wing. So I love him. Okay. I think I've got 9, if you include my Polish bootlegs that are loose graded, I think I've got 9 different Luke X-Wing. So he is a very desirable character. I get it. But I do think he's a little bit overrated. He's just, to me, he's just kind of a frumpy character that didn't get a ton of playability, maybe because of the flight suit. I don't know. But I didn't play with him that much as a kid because I just didn't particularly think he was that great of a character in terms of the figure mold. Take that for what you will. Now, that one may be controversial, but I bet the next 2 will be very controversial in some of y'all's minds. But this is another one that was on the Facebook post and in the comments. This was one that appeared pretty regularly, and I kind of had to agree with it, and that would be Boba Fett. Boba Fett is my number 2 most overrated character. While I love the figure, and I certainly love the character and the mystique of it, I do think that he's a little bit expensive for what you get. So this one, really, if you go back to the factors considered, rarity, yes, there are some rare examples out there, like the Lily Letty removable rocket. Collectability is certainly on the plus for this one because of all the different variants you can get. You got the Hong Kong, you got the Taiwan, you got the Tri-Logo PvP, and there's 5 different or 6 different PvP variations you can get between the painted and unpainted knee, the painted and unpainted wrist dart, and all the different belt colors. And so there are a lot of different variations in terms of collectability. Aura and reputation, I think, is a little bit overblown in my opinion. That's probably, really when I'm looking at this list as it relates to Boba Fett, I'm falling back on number 2 and on number 4. I think he's a little overrated in terms of reputation and aura, and he's a little bit overpriced. So I think those 2 alone are so big and so massive factors in Boba Fett's kind of rank on this that's why I have him number 2. Do I think it's an amazing sculpt? Absolutely. It's an amazing character. It's got a lot going for it. It certainly has the reputation it does because of the whole rocket firing fiasco and the mail away and some of the other different things like that. Obviously, the rocket firing prototypes are very, very pricey, and that was another one that was on the Facebook list, saying that those are very, very expensive, just given that there's probably about a 50 to 100 of those out there that still exist, those rocket firing first shot prototypes. So, in my opinion, I tend to agree with some of the longtime collectors from that group that they think Boba Fett is overpriced. A loose near mint one, ungraded, can set you back $80 or more, and that's a lot of money given how many of them there are out there. So I hope that makes sense. I'm sure I'm going to get crushed in the comments for that, but I do think that he's an overrated, overpriced character. Number 1, I bet I'll probably have some people agree with me on this one, but my number 1 is Yak Face. And I said, or pretty much any last 17, the only exception for me being Luke Stormtrooper. I think Luke Stormtrooper is appropriately expensive, just given how hard it is to find one that's still very white and in very good condition. I do think that mint on cards versions of Luke Stormtrooper, they could probably be on the overrated list, in my opinion. I think that there's a lot of them out there, a lot more of them out there, especially Power of the Force, than maybe people give credit for. I see them pretty much every week on eBay, and they still go for insane money. And, I think I would probably, of the last 17 figures, I might take Luke Stormtrooper off because I do think that that's an important character. and it does have a cool mystique to it. But Yak Face, in my opinion, is easily the most overrated vintage Star Wars action figure out there. There's only one to collect. There's no other variants for it, things like that. And it's kind of an ugly character, in my opinion. It really doesn't fit in. Like this one and a Monomon, to me, don't fit in very well with the rest of the line. And you can make the argument on a few other characters. But in my opinion, Yak Face should not be nearly as expensive as it is, especially lately. I mean, you've seen some of my loose graded videos, my loose complete videos. Yak Faces have really gone up in price over the last year and a half, and I can't understand why. Because they're everywhere. You can find them UKG graded, AFA graded, CAS graded, loose complete in near mint condition, and they're still $600 to anywhere to $1,100 or $1,200. And I don't agree with it. I think that you should not pay that kind of money for it personally. But the market is what the market is. It's supply and demand. And while I think that there is a bigger supply than most collectors give credit for, the demand part of it seems to be there for Yak Face. And I'm not sure why, because it's not that great of a character, in my opinion. I never pick mine up and say, wow, I'm really happy I have a Yak Face. I just don't particularly think he's that great of a character. So that's my number one figure. And again, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. If you liked this list, if you hated it, you can crush me if you want to, but I just wanted to do something kind of different. And I think for tomorrow's video, what I'll do is a top 5 underrated vintage Kenner Star Wars figures. The ones that I think are underrated for how nice they are, or maybe how hard it is to find a good clean one, things like that. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of different video. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.